if we're gonna do some blooper reels, and why do I need this plug?
Well, hello, Mr. Puckett.
Hello, Mr. Ryan. What kind of hat are you wearing?
We are back at it. I know they're kind of taking a little hiatus, little slumber from the YouTubes, as it were.
Yeah, last time we talked, I had to disinfect my computer for 6 months. So thank you.
So we have with us today Andy.
Yeah,
How are you doing today?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good.
Hey, good. I understand you have a mug that kind of describes a little bit about what your role is.
Yeah, well, it's hard lifting this mug, but I'm gonna try to do it this time.
It's not hard when there's something worthwhile drinking in it. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, we're not talking about the contents here. We got to keep this safe for the kids at home.
All right. So one of the things that we talked about having you on to discuss in the light of the COVID situation and a lot of companies that need to have instant capacity to be able to do things like letting their creating small business loans and that sort of thing. A lot of these different organizations that have some requirements to be able to have, that needs lots of traffic. My Internet Explorer hat that I'm wearing here. So you've helped a lot of these customers using some services in Azure to be able to scale up and adopt or be able to accept the amount of traffic that are being thrown at them. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit with you about how you did that, and what services you use, and what sort of capabilities in Azure can help a customer be able to realize that same sort of benefit with some of the customers you've been helping get through some of the COVID virus.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting, right? I mean, it's when February, March came about, right? It actually shifted, not subtly but very dramatically, the way that we interact with things like government, grocery stores, or like your favorite restaurants or whatnot, right? And some areas were somewhat prepared for elevated, and a more of a gradual thing. If you think of like grocery delivery and pickup, right? In a lot of areas in the United States, it's something it's a newer thing that's being gradually introduced, but then it became a necessity, right? And there was a lot of like business process behind all of that, especially like restaurants and grocery stores. But for governments, right, it became like the way to get information out, right? People needed to know, like, can I leave my house and all that other fun stuff, and would go and look at like the state's website, or like me here in I'm down here in Austin. We had an evolving situation with schools. I have a son. Mm-hmm. I needed to know what the role and the advice would change day to day,
right?
Which means I'm hitting a site constantly over and over again.
And if you think about a site like the state, I don't know about you, but I could probably count on one hand the number of times I visited my state website. And it's mostly static content, that you might go to it, Secretary of State or some component or division of the state, and they usually aren't very heavily trafficked. So
right. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, but good.
Yeah. So you look at a customer like that that's not used to all of a sudden having 250,000 concurrent users or some insanely high traffic volume. That's definitely a learning experience and something that they have to adapt to. They might not be equipped to do it, from a capacity situation or from infrastructure to be able to handle that type of volume.
Well, I mean, their budget's probably, they get set a year ahead, and for them that's really tough to, even if they could, right?
Right.
At the capability, that's got to be hard.
Right.
Yeah, and part of it is that they, doing stuff like making a web page, it's pretty easy, right? And especially with a lot of the tools that are out there, right? It's if you're going to, a lot of the tools out there make it really easy for you to create really engaging and graphical kind of pages.
Yeah.
So let me walk you through like just a kind of example, and I'll kind of bring bring it forward with a lot of these sites.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm picturing, these fancy interactive sites with massive JavaScript files. Lots of these libraries that allow you to do some cool things. But when you start throwing load at a site like that, there's some challenges.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to show you a website that I'm using for demo purposes, but it kind of illustrates the point, right? So I don't want to single out any particular
Look, you're not gonna hurt my feelings. It's okay. I get it.
Well, I mean,
know.
mappuckett.com is an awesome site. Okay. So in the fine tradition of demo things, this is another famous Contoso company, right?
Mhm.
So we're going to call it Contoso Masks, right?
Yeah.
And it's it's a rich kind of set of, like, I have a bunch of pictures of all the different kinds of masks that we can get, right? A lot of this is very static, but if you look right here, right, you see current server time and current local time, right?
Mhm.
This gets super interesting, right? It's like, hey, that changes, right? So you have some dynamic capability, and this is where when it gets interesting, and I say interesting, I mean, from a technical perspective, is how do I scale this out, right? Because now, like a lot of places, governments or businesses or whatnot, everyone has this little thing that says, hey, I have this new message that I want you to click on, right? It's like, this is what we're doing for the current situation, right? And then it goes to somewhere else. Well, it's a little hard to see here in the, we'll just, shoot. Oh, I did not want to do that. Okay, so this is on the same domain, and I have all these things that are chewing up the real estate here, but they're all on the same domain, right? This is just contosomass.com/message, right? So the key thing here is now all of a sudden everyone needed masks, and if you think of, like, everyone needed information about COVID, or everyone needed, like, I want groceries, or I want toilet paper, whatever it is, right? People would go to these sites.
Yeah.
When you go to a site, it's a DNS name, right? So like www.contoso.com, and that becomes that one spot that you can do something with. People sometimes refer to it as traffic shaping. How can I shape the traffic to go away from my main site to a cached, part of the site that's cached, or a completely different other site? If you think about, like, a Black Friday, a Singles Day, Boxing Day, right? These pivotal events that everyone's like, hey man, I'm going to go and buy a lot of stuff on the internet. A lot of times vendors have different domains, like deals.something, that has a very specific purpose, just to be like the very front end catalog just for that site. And so a lot of some states actually embrace this idea. So I'll give you an example of a state that, if you go to covid19.ca.gov, for example, this is something I found on through the internet here, and it was a great example here of, like, this is a very segregated site, right? You could point people to it, and it was highly cacheable, and there's techniques to go and figure out what's cacheable and what's not, but think of just generally what changes and what doesn't change, right? Do you have code running, right? And so this.
So you think about, like, images, JavaScript libraries. These are all things that have to come from your browser all the way to the web server and back, and that's load that you're imposing on covid19.ca.gov.
Yeah.
So we need to shed that somehow.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
So let's open up the dev tools just to kind of reinforce this idea here. Well, that did not go well. Let's reattach. Apologize here. There we go.
Yay.
So when we look at, there we go. We're going to unzoom that part a little bit. And when you go and look at, like, we'll go and refresh the page here, and then you go look at the networking section, right? The networking section, which, there we go. So you'll see, right, that you'll start seeing all of these resources, and they're all coming from the same domain.
Yep.
right? And then you'll see this waterfall over here that will talk you all these fun little things of like request sent, content download, and all these other things, right? So these gets, right, these are all live hits. So every time I hit this page, just like Ryan's talking about, all of these things are hitting your server and coming back.
Yeah, and a lot of that stacks up in serial, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's some limits, I think, browser by browser of how many requests to like www or that's why sometimes you might see images dot or resources dot to be able to try to allow your browser to parallelize some of those requests.
Yeah,
exactly. DNS sharding is a technique that you can go and do, because generally the general rule of thumb is that you can do 2 open connections from a browser to a single domain name.
Yeah.
So now what happens is now it loads super fast because the internet now it's pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're gonna tempt the demo gods here. So I have a little override here which changes the equation a little bit. Now so we're gonna let's clear out the thing, let's refresh, and you'll see now that so my homepage comes from my local location, but now I'm hitting cdn.contosomasks.com.
Yep.
So in this part of the example, what we've done is we said, okay, well, we're really going to go and have CDN, basically have the images, the JavaScript, these files that you deliver with your website to a different location. It comes from a different name. It's using the Azure CDN service with the Microsoft provider.
Yep.
What's also interesting is where it's getting those files. So in CDN terms, you have this idea called origin. And origin it's your website or where the content is. Mm-hmm. So when you start playing, what you can do is you can start playing some interesting games, right? Because once you have DNS or something that acts as a layer 7 or acts as the HTTP layer routing at the routing level, you can start playing games of where that content comes from. Mm-hmm. So in this example, all of these images, JavaScript, CSS, all those static files come from an Azure storage account. So even when the CDN says, hey, I haven't loaded this picture, it's going to a storage account. It's not hitting your website.
Right.
So that's one way you can say, like, well, this is one simple thing I can do. Now, it does involve a little code changes because you have to tell.
Yeah. So you look at this thing, you've got 24 requests, 1 hit your web server.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've in effect, reduced, 23x the number of requests for just loading your homepage.
Right. Which that by itself is part of a victory, right?
Right.
And what happens though is that, so now we said, okay, now we're only hitting the site once a time. But when you talk about traditional infrastructure, right, VMs or physical machines running traditional operating systems like Windows and Linux, you still have certain limitations like the number of sockets.
Yep.
Right. And so what happens, right, is that let's say, you get super popular on the internet, someone high up might, I don't know, tweet contosomasks.com, for example, right? Mm-hmm. There's some great masks here, really patriotic. What's that?
You get slash dotted.
Yeah. And what happens is then everybody opens up their phone and they start typing in the URL.
Yeah.
Well, every one of those clients then are establishing their own connections to your infrastructure. Now, depending on the setup, think of like either 32 or 64,000 as being the magic number of connections that you can handle when you talk about ephemeral ports and other things.
Yeah.
There's some ebbs and flows in there. I don't want to get taught in the details, but there's a limit, right? And that limit, it can get reached pretty quick.
That's a hard limit. That's has to do with the size of an integer, and it's fixed on the server so that it can only service that many requests, even if you have a lot of horsepower.
And you have to have, and that's also another good point. It chews up a lot of horsepower. Mm-hmm. It costs CPU time to establish a connection and tear down a connection. And
or
then,
if you're using SSL, that's even more.
Oh yeah.
If you have that on a server, because now you have to encrypt it, and the CPU on the server has to encrypt all that traffic before it sends it back. So these are all just situations that can spiral out of control for sure if you get hammered.
Right, and then that's also something we talk about global reach, right? Just to take a little side trip on the global reach. I want to keep TLS and SSL in the back of your mind as we go through this. So now, let's say we use something called Front Door. Now, Azure Front Door is it is part of the CDN family, but it's the Microsoft Dynamic Site Acceleration product. This is the one that you put in front of a dynamic site, and it basically makes it so you're going through our infrastructure to get to you. Now, in this example, right, it's basically Front Door and everything's hitting through Front Door.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we'll clear this out and we'll just refresh it again here. And now, what's really interesting about this, Mark, is Front Door, and this is also similar to our CDN products. It's about basically a global approach of absorbing traffic. So all the CDNs, they have this thing called a point of presence. Think of it as a data center, right? Mm-hmm. You have data centers, and the different CDN vendors have different strategies. So for Microsoft, we have, a lot of Azure regions. We also have a lot of network point of presence around the world, and there's about 160 right now. And what happens is that they're strategically located to allow the best possible traffic for people around the world. But what happens is that, let's say you have 250,000 people, and they're going to go and hit your website all at once, right? It's a watching party, right? Someone's got like some crazy YouTube, like, hey, let's hit contosamass.com at the same time, right? 3, 2, 1. What happens is that everyone's client resolves Front Door contosamass.com in this example to the local point of presence, and that local point of presence acts as that. Think of it as the dam or the wall that's absorbing the massive surge of traffic, right?
Unless you're in Michigan.
And, what's that?
I said unless you're in Michigan.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's at the moment.
At the moment,
there's definitely some bad things going on in the news with regards to dams and water flows in Michigan.
I want to pick a different analogy.
Yeah. Midland's not really doing so well right now.
No.
Oh no,
I'm hoping. I hope everyone that I know down there, and everyone just down there is safe. But when you look at like this, so you have 250,000 people that then establish connections to Front Door all around, wherever they're at, whether it's around a state or the country or other things. What's interesting is that it's purpose-built network hardware, and since Front Door is a layer 7 proxy, your website doesn't get the 250,000 individual connections. Front Door creates persistent connections in a pool because it's a proxy. And so one thing you start seeing is a lot less connections directly to your infrastructure.
So it's a good way to stretch your infrastructure, you're saying?
Did you just bring out one of your exercise bands? Sorry, Andy. Usually my co-host is really professional. Not today.
Wow. I don't know. Hold on. I think I need a drink after that one.
Technically, what we're saying is, you have like a puny server. You can kind of stretch it along a little bit farther and
do the
demonstration. True. Well, and remember, all this is you're trying to chip away at things. There is no magic bullet, right? There's no silver bullet with this. What you're doing is there's different techniques that you're trying to do to make what you have more, more efficient, right? This saves you on CPU. The other benefit for the users, right, is that instead of your users going from wherever they're at over the public internet to wherever your servers are at, Microsoft is the second largest telecom in the world when you refer to it by the amount of networking cable run around the planet.
Oh wow, yeah.
So what happens is that you get your traffic. It's a red carpet approach. Mm-hmm. So now you enter in Microsoft's basically network, the Azure network,
Front door, through a front door.
through a
Aptly
front
named.
door.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We now lead you through the entrance area over to, over to where the dinner is being served. Right.
Ryan, where's your red carpet? I don't see your red carpet. Where is it?
Yeah, I don't have anything I can.
I do. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah.
Oh, you're fine. No, you're fine. No, it's all good. And then it comes back. But the other thing I wanted to touch on real quick is, and Ryan mentioned this about SSL, right? So, Front Door does the SSL basically encode and decoding at the edge. It's still best practice to even encode it, have it encrypted back to your origin. But that's done through persistent connections, because one of the biggest parts of, especially when you talk about global traffic, is the whole TLS dance, right? It's
Yeah.
7 or 8 round trips going back and forth, right? To, I think it's 7 or 8 trips. I mean, it's significant, where you're establishing a secure connection and you're doing that initial handshaking.
That's like me in the bathroom after about 9 cups of coffee.
Well, right. It's but this way you can wish it upon someone else. And
Oh,
you don't have to
nice.
pick it up, right?
Yeah.
It's like remote delivery, right?
So there's
Hey,
a
honey,
lot
can you
involved
pass
in putting that little padlock up there at the in the address bar. So
What's that?
Just take
there's a
that
lot
for
involved
granted.
in getting that padlock up there in the address bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and it's just going to, as we learn how to better secure things, it's just going to get a little bit more and more, right?
Yeah.
And it's a nature of the world. But what's fun is, and I have some some data here we can talk through real quick about some of. If I could.
No, you can't.
Spell. Well, right. You gotta type the stuff in right here, right? So what we ran some performance tests, and the website, it's located inside of central US, right? So that's somewhere.
You're that small? That's insane.
What's that?
I said the measurements, they're so tiny.
Well, some of them are super tiny, right? And what happens, right, is that as you start looking at what happens if I hit from different parts of the world, right? Like, where can I get benefit from, from Front Door? And so you start measuring certain things, like, so you have the total duration, right? That's really interesting.
Sure.
But what we did is we did a fixed duration test with the same number of users. And so, these numbers are interesting. We'll get back to them in a second. But you start looking at the idea of how long does it take for you to establish a connection?
Mm-hmm.
Do
the receiving, sending
and receiving.
The back
and then you have the handshake.
Yeah.
The handshake is the big one. And then
Holy
you
cow.
also have the waiting, which is, the receiving and the waiting. You're waiting for that initial response, and then receiving it is how long to download everything, right?
Well, I thought it was you're waiting on your wife and kids to come out of the house so you guys can go to dinner. That's waiting for me.
Oh, well,
But it ain't in milliseconds. I can tell you that right now.
You're a braver person than I am. We're not going to dinner anywhere right now. But
Unless it's abbreviation for months. That was.
But the thing is, right, is that you tend to see, even in the United States, you will see benefit for just making that TLS handshake smaller, because you're going back and forth constantly.
Right.
It's not a lot of data, right? But you take things that were taking 400 milliseconds, and you're taking it down to 50 milliseconds.
Yeah, the perception of the user, and this is just, if you think about this, all the artifacts that are needed, you had 24 just for your homepage. Your web browser has to do all this negotiation between the browser and the server.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can reduce it by that factor, for individual requests, the end user is going to see it as the page loading, almost instantaneously.
This is even on top of Ethernet, TCP/IP. I mean, if we're having to do any kind of resends. Right. Because CRC errors or misalignments or jitter or whatever, this is just exacerbating other problems.
Yeah,
exactly. And the other part is that, like, when you talk about connecting and then TLS handshake, there's almost nothing you can do from an app side to make that better.
No.
Right?
Right.
And so like when you talk about, hey, so my website's slow, I need more hardware. Okay, well, get more hardware, but that is on the waiting and receiving side. Right? When you say, well, what can I do to enhance this, right? This is something where you can make enhancements to your site without more infrastructure or code, right? It also makes it where if you're in Western Europe or you're in India, right? I mean, this is the total duration of a multi-page flow, right? And that's 8 seconds. Well, it's 6 seconds in the United States.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're making decisions to say, hey, do I copy all my infrastructure and put it across the pond somewhere and then have to deal with like, well, how do I reconcile the data and all that other stuff? Well, another way you look at it is, can I bring the users closer to me through a more predictable network path?
Yeah, and if you look, I mean, the user experience in West Europe and India, I mean, it's pretty abysmal, 14, 17 seconds.
Yeah.
And you're getting that back down to more an acceptable range that's actually on par with what they'd experience here in the U.S. where the site's hosted.
Right. And that's one of the benefits. And when it comes down to predictability, from the Azure side, we actually publish our average latency every month. We publish our average latency from one place to another place, and that's a general guideline of what you might see in some of the latency differences between like if I'm going from somewhere in Austin, Texas to central United States versus I'm in Munich, Germany, and going to somewhere in central U.S. Right?
Yeah. So in a couple of minutes, I mean, would you be able to show us a couple? I mean, the results I think speak for themselves, and we've highlighted kind of the how and the why, and then what can be layered on to improve it. But how difficult? I think a front door, pulling the trim off, having to do touch-up paint and all this other stuff, and I put in a new door. Like, how challenging is this to get it installed in your subscription?
Did you just go to a Home Depot reference? What were you doing?
Yeah, well, I went there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was ready to wait for like, do we have a barbecue going on? That sounds great right now. Right. All right. Yes. So yeah, let me switch over to the Azure portal. Okay. So what I'll do, let me start creating a front door. And I'm just going to show you a couple basics, and then I'm going to show you one that's fully populated. Okay. There is some time, right? Once you configure things for stuff to replicate. And there's one other catch, is that having someone that has the ability to change DNS with you, super helpful, right? That's usually the biggest thing, because what you're going to ask to do, right? And let's just create one here real quick. You're going to ask, basically, we're going to say, I'm going to put it here. We're going to put it in. So we'll put it in Minecraft. That sounds great, right? What's that?
I said, poor kids. They don't know what's going to hit them.
All right. So we'll call this Bill and Ted's Excellent. That's what you guys remind me of.
Oh, that's copyright. Can't do it. Sorry.
Okay. Let's see here.
I did like MattPuckett.com, but I don't know.
Oh, well.
I'm a little biased.
Puckett and Ryan. Okay, we're not going to spend too much time here, but you see, you put in a name, right?
Yep.
And this name is going to create a public DNS name. And the first part of this to understand is you're going to create something called a CNAME in DNS. A CNAME, it's an alias, right?
Kind of so, yep.
Yep. And that alias is going to then basically, through the magic of DNS, get you over to your site. But in order to have the alias, you have to have the basis for the alias first. So we're going to call it this kind of combobulation of names, and then I'm going to, there we go. Going to add.
Bam.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So when you talk about a front door, you create the front. You say where you're going to go to, and then you're going to say how do you get there, right? So this is the front. The back end What's interesting about the backend, and we're gonna keep this all cloud native. We're gonna call it app services. You know, we're just gonna name it something app service. We make it easy for you to go and say, I want to pick something, right? Do I want to pick an app service, storage, API management, app gateway, a lot of these things, right? Or you can put stuff in a different data center, right?
Cool.
As long as you can get an IP address or a DNS name, you can get there. But we'll pick an app service, and we will go. You know, I like that one. That's a fun one, right? So we'll just point to that guy there, right?
Yep. Go Bob.
Right. Doop. So now I've added this here. Now what's also really cool is you can add multiple, right? So let's say you want to load balance across multiple different instances of your website. Sorry, you can add multiple up here. You can start doing things with prioritization and which really go to like, what's that?
Oh no, I'm parroting you like I'm smart. That's all.
Oh, you're a beautiful man. Load balancing. What's really cool, and we're doing a better job of trying to get this documented. But the idea here is, let's say you had 3 instances of your website. You said, look, as long as you can get within 100 milliseconds or less for that particular request, go there, right? That's much different than saying go to the closest. Closest is all relative.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yep.
If you have a website on the East and the West Coast, and the East one is getting hammered, and you have someone in New York trying to get that, do you want them to have the bad experience, or do you want to get them over to the other side? And that's the power of the back end of the Azure network that you can leverage there. So we're just going to add that. Now the routing rules are really fun. This is where the how do you get to there? So we're going to redirect. So we're going to do a little trickery here. We're going to say we only want HTTPS to go to our back end. So at the front end, we're going to say, hey, look, if you come and hit us on HTTP here, and this is where you can start specifying paths.
Okay.
I want you to redirect to HTTPS only, right? So redirect to the secure side.
Ooh.
So now what happens is Front Door, very close to the customer, won't let anything in unsecure, right? And we'll just tell the browser, hey, come to this other spot. And then I say, send all HTTPS, right? We're going to send all HTTPS. And we're going to do a forward route type. And that means send it to this backend. And don't do any crazy things with the URL and don't cache it. Just send it.
Okay.
At that point, you hit review and create.
Yep.
It takes a couple of minutes for the DNS and the rules to propagate.
Yep.
And then you have a front door.
So this handles removing the element of SSL encryption from your web server, and it relieves some of the pressure of, I should say it provides some load balancing capabilities to direct you to different instances that you might have of your application, maybe spread geographically. So it handles that, but I noticed we kind of glossed over the caching part of it, which sounds like probably the other part that you're going to talk about and kind of show us the one that's built.
Well, caching's a whole subject.
Okay.
For another show, but I think he's wanting a callback.
Hey, yeah. I like to talk. You guys know this, right?
Yeah.
But I need to let's put out a little PSA, a little warning here, right? Caching in CDNs can be very dangerous.
Okay.
If you cache something that's not meant to be cached, and when we talk about caching HTTP, it's not just images. This will cache the entire response, which will include like cookies.
Or a GET request with a query string that has stuff in it. So,
right. Or like someone's authenticated context, like the first person to hit that page. And then you see someone else's, account information, right? And this is where you want to take great care when you say, I'm going to layer caching on top of an existing page. There's ways to do that, but like I said, that's a whole other area.
Okay, fair enough. So I think it'd be a great topic to have you back to kind of, walk through that a bit.
Yeah. So let me just show here. Here's the one we were looking at, right?
Okay.
So we have the front door. We have an app service. Yeah, some rules here, but we also have a bunch of custom front end domains. So let's take a look at this one real quick, and I'll show you what this one does. Front Door with redirect Contoso masks, right? So it's a custom domain name. That's this.
Mm-hmm.
Front Door will actually create an SSL certificate for you for free. And we'll publish it for you, and we'll manage it for you. I mean, you could probably go through all the internet fails with people that have had, SSL certs that have expired. This will manage it for you. It's a great certificate. Works fantastic.
Okay.
But this is where DNS becomes really important, because in order for Front Door to safely allow traffic with your, based on your domain name, right? It wants to make sure that you own the domain and all the other fun stuff. Great links here to make it super simple. Just a little planning. But the reason why this one's interesting, I did not change anything. It has a special routing rule. So one thing I glossed over is that on the routing rules, you can pick which one of the front-end domains that you pick for a rule. So this particular one, Front Door with redirect, if it's slash message, it redirects to messagecontosomasks.com. So if you remember the site, it had the little banner. Instead of that going to www, this is a way that in front of your website, you could say, hey, for this URL, I want you to redirect to this special place.
Yeah.
Okay.
I need to shape the traffic over there.
So you can do this on the fly too, that if you start having a bunch of traffic going to your message site, you can make a static, maybe put it in a storage account. You can create a rule here and offload that from your web server. Again, kind of stretching the server.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's exactly what we did for that example, right?
Okay.
Is that, and so now what happens is, right, is now you're offloading that traffic, because people sometimes forget, like, oh, well, you said messages.contosomasks.com. What was? No, I'm just gonna go to the homepage. There'll be a link there somewhere for me to go find.
Right.
Yeah.
And now the last part is there's also a way that you can inject another rule in there to go to a static version of your homepage, right? Because people often overlook all the dynamic things that happen on a homepage. You can use that same technique for your homepage to say, hey, this is if you want to go to the original site, it's kind of over here, right? But it's then can be all served from static content and caching, whatnot. So lots of fun stuff.
Very cool.
Okay. Well, very cool. Well, thank you very much for kind of walking through, the basics of how interactions work between your browser and the web server, and walking through how Front Door can help with that. And definitely looking forward to having you back on and talking about how CDN can be wired into all this.
Yeah, appreciate it, Andy. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I had a blast too, guys. We'll talk to you.
All right. Thanks.